we really do need technology when we think about scale. Now, what could that mean in a project like this? I mean, how might we plant trees more effectively, fast, and ensure that over 90% of them can live?
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Voice of Gen Z. I'm Sabah from the growth marketing team at Climes, back to record my third podcast. Great to be back. Today we have with us Sheeba Sen, the co-founder of Hasten Regeneration. So great to have you here, Sheeba. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, hi Sabah. Thanks for having me.
So Sheeba has spent the last 10 years working across rural India on poverty alleviation initiatives, and 5 years ago founded ALAP, a social enterprise with a mission to catalyze regeneration across India, and of course now working at Hasten Regeneration. And for our listeners, if that word Hasten sounds familiar, it's because one of the projects we have on the Climes platform, Reviving Community Forests in Uttarakhand, is run by Sheeba and Hasten. So today we're going to be talking about creating a holistic impact project, or designing a carbon project that has socioeconomic benefits for the whole community beyond just the environmental benefits. So to start us off, Sheeba, if you can tell us a little bit about the origins of your not-for-profit and what inspired you to focus on ecosystem restoration in Uttarakhand specifically.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently based out of Bangalore, but I've spent about 10 years permanently living in the hills of Uttarakhand in the last, and continue to work there through our project. I'd started my career in, you can say, the development space in an organization called Aarohi. That's a grassroots NGO based in the hills for over 30 years now. So that's where I learned the real ropes of what happens on the ground. And I was working there for 5 years. I led that organization as the executive head for 2 out of 5 years. So I got to see what projects are across the board in a rural community, which now I can sort of synthesize and say that translates across rural areas in developing countries across the globe. So it's a very similar situation, slightly different localized contexts. So you see why are projects put together in health, livelihoods, in areas like the foothills of the Himalayas, social forestry. It's very much part of food production, part of everyday livelihoods, and then even things like early years education for children, so on and so forth. And then as leading the organization, I also got to see how projects are financed, what's the life cycle of the projects, what works, what doesn't work as well, and where I would sort of maybe see the scope to really expand and test if we can do things differently. And that's what led to me moving on from Aarohi and founding ALAP 5 years ago, which was a social enterprise. Started with a mission of reforesting the central Himalayas in Uttarakhand. And the evolution of ALAP has led to Hasten Regeneration, where we are looking at what we call as poverty alleviation. Is poverty, climate, it goes hand in hand in countries like India. And these are large-scale local issues. So Hasten is now looking at large-scale restoration projects at a landscape level across the globe. And one of our major projects is in Uttarakhand. And this is in particular Hasten Regeneration, which is a not-for-profit. And I lead that now with my co-founder, Peter Coughlin. And Uttarakhand was going to be our top, most, in a way, intimate project, because I have a personal history there for nearly 15 years now. Now, about the project, like I describe any of these projects, it's a restoration project, but it's also an economic development project. It is a carbon project. It's a waste to energy project. It's many, many kinds of ways of describing that, but we can get into it as we dig deeper.
Yeah, for sure. I also think on our platform, that project is a particular favorite, so we're really glad to have it on board. But you mentioned that across developing countries, it's quite similar, the kind of projects that get set up and how the process is. But I'd like to deep dive into specifically the Indian context, which we all know is very complex to to kind of implement something like this. What does it take to get a project like this off the ground? Like, who do you need to get buy-in from? Who are the stakeholders? What does that kind of network look like? And how do you navigate the system?
Yeah, I mean, I can be open enough to say it's pretty daunting at the start. And the reason for that is there are many moving parts. So in a nutshell, it's sort of project development work, but it's also solutions integration work and process integration work. So these three define, I'd say, a large-scale restoration project, which is a large-scale restoration project can be described as at a landscape level. So you look at a landscape across certain 1,000 hectares. So the vision is to transform that landscape. And with that landscape, obviously, you have the communities living there, you have the biodiversity of flora and animals and systems. If you look at it, you want to regenerate that. So when we look at it, I would say there are 4 or 5 elements to this as a project developer. First and foremost is that you should be able to think in multiple parts together and have the ability to speak to the audience in their vocabulary. So if I speak to a carbon investor, I speak in carbon vocabulary, like at Climes often. If I speak to a philanthropist, I would speak in terms of the social returns on investment that they can have, which is not on financial returns. If I speak to an impact investor, early stage, middle stage, I have to speak in that vocabulary. So this is sort of at the market end. Similarly, at the project end, if I'm speaking to the local farmer, I have to design the solution of which he's very much a part of or she's a part of, and speak to them in their language, how their needs will be met, what is in it for them, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to get across is that to restore landscapes, you have 4 or 5 moving parts, and I've sort of written here, which is you look at food and livelihoods. That's where your community comes in. Then you look at the landscape restoration. That's where the environmental aspects come in. So you're looking at which species to plant, what densities to plant, how to prepare the soil. And like I always say, whenever you talk about planting trees, you really have to look at how many of those trees remain standing. So how do you maximize on your survival rates? Then what are the rights over the land that you're working on? Are these community lands? Are these private smallholder farmer lands? How are you safeguarding the land rights? And also then how do you measure your progress? Have you got your data measurements in place? What is your monitoring verification framework look like? What role does technology play in that? So these are sort of the 5 pillars of a landscape level restoration project. And with these pillars, you have stakeholders.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for laying that out, because we're going to double click on quite a few of those in that conversation. So that's actually a very good overall description of what we're going to be talking about today. But I'd like to start with what you mentioned about making sure the survival rate of the trees specifically. So you talked about talking to farmers, local community, making sure that they're bought into the project that you're running. So I'd be interested to know, for these, like you're saying, landscape, nature-based projects, it's a long gestation period before we see the impact of the work that we're doing. We're planting trees, it takes years for trees to grow, etc., etc. So how do you make sure that the farmers, the people on the ground, are bought into the project, into maintaining the project for the timelines required? How do you make sure they remain active participants and continue to report and provide that data effectively?
Yeah, sure. So I think the very first step in designing this aspect and figuring this out is to have that intent. So you have to understand that unless you meet the needs of the landholder, if it's the farmer, if it's the Gram Panchayat, if it's the government, if it's a private wealthy farmer, if it's a large holder or small holder, you have to understand that you have to meet the needs of the landholder. And once you meet the needs of the landholder, then you are driving positive behavior and mitigating the risks of these trees not being looked after, maintained, or worse still, cut down after a certain age that they've reached. So first of all, this has to be a very clear understanding. Now, how do you go about it? In sort of technical terms, you do a social assessment. So the process of that is you figure out, and at a very start, it's, as I said, it's daunting. You don't know exactly where you're going to plant all your trees. So for example, our Uttarakhand project is actually a 5 million tree project, of which we have a little capsule that, we have showcased on plans. Now, so we have a broad idea of, say, in the next 7 to 8 years, where these 5 million trees are going to go. So for example, that area is spread across 3 districts of Uttarakhand. Now, in those districts, we then work through a process through our partners. So you have to have, and landscape restoration work is a partnership game. Don't go in single-handed in there. You have to work with people. So you work with, local NGOs to say, okay, these villages are accessible. Here, the community needs this. Community is quite willing to collaborate. Maybe watering won't be an issue here. So you have various indicators, right? So you figure out which areas you want to map out. And then you conduct this very specific technical exercise called social assessment. So you go and you speak to the two types. We at Hasten, we work at 2 types of land holdings. One is community lands, which are owned by the community. So in India, it's owned by the Gram Panchayat or the Van Panchayat in Uttarakhand. So it's a specific forest, community forests, which is a very typical thing of the Uttarakhand. It's not always there in all the states. And then we also work on private farmer lands. So if you're a farmer, you want to plant some fruit trees, nut trees, we'll work with you as well. So we go and speak with a certain N number of farmers. We understand their needs. There's a process that we follow, which is because of, we have a design thinking and systems approach that we bring into our design. It's a very qualitative kind of a conversation where we figure out what is their real need out of their land. I mean, at a very basic level, they have to live off it, but sometimes other things as well. They want to safeguard it for their children or grandchildren, or they want to really leave something as their need, as their legacy. They want to leave their land, or there is a pure economic need. So, there are various kinds of needs that we understand. And according to that, we have a system where we then decide what trees will be favorable to this kind of a farmer land or this kind of a village land. And 2, what is the financial incentive? Because that is a non-negotiable, because that drives behavior. What is the financial incentive that you can build in with these farmers right from day one, like you said? So that goes in how we model the whole project returns, that you start paying the incentive for positive behavior, which starts right from the day that they decide to plant the tree, even if it's so small. But they start getting financial incentives paid periodically. And then those get, sort of divided over the lifespan of the project. So we build in, you can say in simple words, if someone is listening, we build in as project cost. So if we have a cost to plant a tree, we have a cost to reward the person who has decided to take this positive step and collaborate with us. So they get rewarded from day one. They don't have to wait for the trees to grow until 10, 15, 20 years to get the benefit.
Yeah, exactly. That's so important. I'm going to pick up on 2 things that you mentioned there. One, that finance is the incentive for behavior change, and the other is that for doing something climate friendly, like planting a tree, they deserve to be rewarded, which are 2 of the main ethoses of what Climes is built around, and that we want to incentivize good climate behavior, we want to reward it, and we want society to reward the people and the organizations that are taking those steps towards fighting climate change. But I just wanted to mention specifically, you mentioned that finance is a incentive for behavior change, which I completely and fully agree with. But one aspect of maintaining a long project is, of course, taking care of the trees, but also reporting that data and consistently providing the data to the project, which I am guessing in many situations would involve some kind of a educational barrier that has to be crossed. How do we go about crossing that? How do you get people on board with that specifically, beyond just the financial incentive?
Yeah, Sabha, so you're absolutely right that driving behavior change, financial incentives play a very critical role in that. But what our learning has been that actually that's not the only incentive. that the landholders look at, especially in the very degraded and economically unresilient places where our projects are, like in Uttarakhand. People are fighting for everyday survival there, right? So they don't have basics of health and education or cash. They don't have cash. There's no safe that they've built in that sense. So in terms of the barriers, we found that actually when we were just building financial incentives, that was taking us up to a point. Innovative about that, we started to also think about building incentives in kind. So for example, right now what we are working at is that if a farmer, they can be trained, and there are a lot of young people around who can be trained in data measurement and so on. These are good jobs to have. These are largely part-time jobs, but it adds to their employment opportunities. But the real incentive to actually collaborate, provide the data, let that process move smoothly for the project. We started to look at connecting, say, for a participating farmer who is planting trees on their farm, also as a village, if they've collaborated and enrolled on the project and planting trees on their commons. We are exploring partnerships with NBFCs where the farmers of that village might be able to access a loan at a more favorable rates of interest, for example. Two, we've started to design a sort of a local entrepreneurship, you can say, model in which people can be incubated. So there's a set of 3 women, for example. They can be incubated to actually run a nursery business where we have a buyback guarantee to buy those plants from them. But what happens is we've actually incubated them to run a small micro business, which is divided between 3 women. They can divide their work hours. So that really gives them that over and above that, they've just come and planted a tree and they get paid for that, and they might get paid something monthly to protect that tree. This is the 3rd layer of incentives that we've built, that we actually train them, incubate them, skill them. And then this is the ways of, really having that multiple systems lens and to keep all these moving parts in tow. And then sum it up as a financial incentive, training and skilling, whether it's for planting, raising plants, maintaining them, learning how to collect the baseline data and periodic data, how to present that, all that training to go with it, and keep building that in-kind and financial incentives to meet as many needs as you can to get that buy-in over time. But more than that, I would say that it is also a very regenerative way of thinking. Like, you have to reach abundance. So you start thinking at every level that how do I create multiple levels of impact? Some are measurable, like we would talk about in Climes. We would talk about the carbon, we talk about biodiversity, we talk about employment opportunities, and some are slightly less right now. We don't have the framework to measure them right now. We're not formally measuring skilling, or sort of the idea of having some kind of financial empowerment for the women, if they've got a small little nursery business, or 10 youths have been skilled in an app that can help them to measure data for us. What does it do? So we haven't yet reached, as an early stage developer, to have these fairly complicated impact measurement frameworks, which we intend to have, and which can be argued that don't directly contribute to the carbon sequestration, but they have to be there for a successful and less risky carbon project.
Yeah, 100%. I love the way you describe that. It's like one initiative is basically lifting the whole community in so many different ways, like so much more than just one financial incentive. And I'm glad you brought up measurement, because that is actually one of my questions, is that with carbon, we can quantify it, although that is a whole conversation in itself on the accuracy of quantification. But how do we actually communicate a social co-benefit or a qualitative impact that we're having? And I fully agree that even as a company that's focused on carbon, when we're talking about the impact of a project, it's so much more important for the customer, for the brand, for anybody else to know about the story of how that's impacting the people around it, how it's uplifting the community. So we tried, like I remember we even had a conversation about how we could pick up some kind of personalized information from people working on the ground so that people who are financing can be directly connected to the impact that they're having and the people that they're helping. And things like videos, testimonials, interviews, content like that, I think is what's going to be really key and a differentiator for projects in general. So you're not just looking at methodologies and reports, but actually the people behind what the work you're doing.
It's a skill, right? And that's something that we have to build into the project team. And also a lot of times I feel the whole climate work is, it's an emotional subject. And even with an intangible commodity like carbon, there are 2-3 ways to effectively communicate your story to really cover the ground and build that confidence in the market. I would say first and foremost, it has to be science-based reporting. So as a good project developer, we have to have a scientific framework to the extent with the information possible, and often with the resources that are available to us, especially as an early stage developer where, financial resources, we are working in very tight budgets here, to have as much as scientific rigor and transparency in measurement and how we might calculate if someone is paying through a mechanism of carbon. So, okay, let's at least report how much carbon sequestration has happened. Now, it's a minefield of work, and like you had already acknowledged, like as a community and as a sector, there's so much of work happening in this carbon measurement, as I said. But as a developer, you have to have that as this first level non-negotiable data reporting requirement. So start building in that in the way you're designing and implementing your project. Right from day one, you have your baselines in place and you have periodic data measurements and transparent about it. First and foremost. Second, then comes more on the qualitative side of things, and that's where you look at communicating. It's actually storytelling. So you have to tell the story effectively that it becomes very human. Climate change is a universal issue, unlike even poverty, I think, that everyone is touched by, right? Through different things. So you have to tell that story. Sabha, it's whatever project developer, as I said, not all project developers are same. So you just have to have that intent. And how do you see that story of people who are participating, or story of a barren land coming alive, or a new economic engine being put into that place that actually results in more nature being restored? You have to tell those stories. So videos, photos, blogs, and if people, be open, invite people to come in, visit your project. You just have to really tell the human side of things.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the points I'd actually pick up from there is the way you've described how it has to be such a holistic system where you're thinking about so many different things at once and applying it just within the context of this one Uttarakhand project. How do we maintain that kind of impact, the kind of impact that you're having with that project, and then also apply it at the large scale that we need it to actually have an effect on climate change? Because it's going to need to be more than just one project in Uttarakhand. It has to be projects all over the country in all different formats. So how, as a project developer, given that you're now working across many different, a huge landscape, how do you go about making sure that scaling is possible?
It's a completely different ballgame.
With the same impact.
That's the first, I have to admit. I mean, it's a completely different thing for me to say that, we've worked with, 10 villages and we've got over a 90% survival rate, and, we've got these amazing stories, so intimate stories of people who see the value in this work. And that thought process has already started, Sabha, in our team. So in fact, just last week on a team call, I was thinking that it's fine to say that, we've even planted 100,000 trees or even 1 million trees if we look at it. This is one way of sizing a project, number of trees. We're doing it manually, we're creating those jobs, we are doing it the way we are right now. But that is not going to, really actually work at a large landscape level if we have to. And we don't have to do it personally, but even to kind of make it more accessible to do it with many, many others, right? So I think there is a big role for technology to play. So I'm a firm believer, and I have shifted on this spectrum. You see, I've come grounds up. I've come from a very hardcore NGO background. So naturally, I'm very people-centric. But I have shifted on this spectrum that we really do need technology when we think about scale. Now, what could that mean in a project like this? I mean, how might we plant trees more effectively, fast, and ensure that over 90% of them can live their lives to their, maturity? Two, how might we have technology play a role in measurement? I mean, a lot of startups are doing MRV innovation, so on and so forth. And as a project developer, how might we integrate those new solutions into our measurement to make our project high quality, high impact from an investor point of view? And people who put money in our projects, individuals as well, right? Three, when we talk about financial incentives, so for example, you get paid to plant and look after a tree, right? As a landholder, as a farmer. How might we have technology there to create transparency that these payments are being made well? So digital payment infrastructure, for example, at a large scale, and how that might be eventually, I mean, this is a dream of mine, but eventually could it be tied up with, say, your Aadhaar card, and your digital payments are being made at that level, at a state level, at that way, because then those incentives are very measurable, and then people can relate that to action. So I don't have the very clear-cut answer to scaling, but this is how we are thinking about it.
No, I'm completely on board with you there, and actually fully speaking my language, because I also came from an anthropological background. I was working in policy, and I just happened to end up at Climes, which was then climate tech. And coming here, I realized the potential of scale through technology. And of course, so much of what we've built, like you're saying, is for transparency, using technology to bring transparency to carbon markets, to carbon projects, so that people can trace the money, they know when it's reached the person, they can see the person that it's, financing. So fully agree with you there. But a personal question coming from my anthropology background is, of course, we always read about how there would be like a big impact fund that came into a localized context and was, implementing a globally recognized system globally, like it works, it's going to work for you as well. But then in the localized context, a cultural context, it, never ends up working. So have you in your project come across some kind of cultural barriers like that you had to navigate, and how did you get past them?
Even just the idea of planting trees in the hills, because when you go to Uttarakhand and speak to people, they'll be like, "Lagaye hue ped pahad mein nahi lagte hain," i.e., you can't plant trees here. You have to work in a way that they naturally regenerate. So complement, sort of many other activities that we do with reforestations to ensure that there is also natural regeneration. Like we can't ultimately plant billions of trees in Uttarakhand, right? So we'll plant X percentage of trees, and a larger percentage as a result will naturally regenerate the native trees. This was a very deeply held conviction of the local communities, and the reason for that was the way reforestation largely has been happening there and still continues to. I mean, we are still on a large scale of things, even as an aspirant for a 5 million tree project, we're still a small project in the grand scheme of things, right? And the reason is that things are not done, and largely, the reforestation initiatives are not really carried out in a transparent way. They're not done with proper soil work, proper accountability or intent for those trees to, live. Like, we've planted X number of trees, but I can plant X number of trees, but none of them will live. So I think this is the biggest thing we had to come over and cross over initially, and we that took time. We experimented with various methodologies of planting, and Sabha, what we are working is reviving on ecosystems. We are not working on planting trees. So if you look at it in a narrow sense that, we are planting trees, yes, we are, but that actually is a very critical, but a very small part of what we actually do on the ground, But we can't talk about everything we do on the ground because it's very confusing for someone who's listening. So when we say that, we have to revive an ecosystem is much more than just taking a tree and planting it and having a Photoshop of, watering it. It doesn't work like that. So we really had to innovate for this system. How do we work on the soil? How do we work on the soil where we can't water it every day like we water our garden? Because it's, one, not feasible. Two, it's very expensive. So it won't make the project viable. Three, how do we work on inclines? How do we work, where we have limited amount of manure available over the year? And then how do we work in a way where we just don't plant 3, 4, 5, even 10 species of trees, but 30 plus species of trees, 50 plus species of trees, right? To generate real original forests. And that has taken us 5 years, but I can fairly confidently say that bit we've cracked. And now, because the community can see this and they're seeing pretty good results in front of their eyes, they're very excited about it. Now they want to say, okay, if I can be rewarded for taking this positive action, at the face of it, is a win-win for me because I need these trees for my basic livelihoods. Also, they have an element of romance. They love their forests. They love their trees. There's an emotional aspect. And then they can be paid for it. There can be new jobs. But and don't get me wrong, there are always bad actors around, who can cause damage, who may burn the trees. You have to build that into anything. But on the whole, it's a very well-received activity and project so far. I'm pretty safe in saying that.
100%. That's so great to hear. I'm so happy this is on a podcast. I hope lots of people hear that because it really is inspiring for people working in the field who may have not yet, been in touch with the impact that they could and potentially have created, actually how important it is that we are working on projects like this.
It really goes a long way. It's quite incredible, actually. Yeah.
It's amazing. So like a successful I would consider this a successful project, of course. It can serve as a model for others. Have you seen maybe like neighboring regions or communities expressing interest in replicating what you're doing? Is there some kind of like a chain reaction starting?
Very well connected. I mean, as I said, we want to be doing multiple projects. In this particular project, it's we have a lot of social capital already built in because of our existing networks. People are waiting, Sabha. Carbon projects at a scale have a gestation period, and we are working with Climes very closely on that, over and above what your viewers will see on your dashboard. There's a lot of work that I'm working with Climes to really scale this project to the next level, but it naturally comes with a gestation period. So we have immense interest across the state, but also in Himachal, in Jammu and Kashmir, which have very similar kind of challenges and topography and constitution of forests.
I think that line you said, people are waiting, that's such an exciting thing for me to hear, because with Climes, you hope to reach as many, at least for now, just within India, as many corners of the country as possible to really bring the nature back in a way that we're trying so hard to do. And the idea that just out there, everyone is just waiting for that opportunity is like the most motivating thing for me in my everyday work. So love to hear that from you. And that's a great note to kind of start bringing this conversation to a close, which I've really, really enjoyed. Thank you so much. But I think just, of course, before we close, would love to hear from you. Like you're talking about scaling this project with Climes. what other future plans do you have for restoration across the globe that you're now working on with Hasten Regeneration?
Yeah, doing regenerative restoration work at a meaningful level, and to drive investment across the board, not just philanthropic donations, grants, but investment into these large projects. It's about building partnerships. It is really about developing projects with multiple partners. And we are designing 3 projects as I speak right now in India, and they have more than 15 to 20 organizations as part of that. That's what it takes, So I think the flexing of the muscle at Hasten Regeneration as a project developer for landscape restoration is really having this muscle to bring people together. Really, that's what it is. We don't have to be owners of a certain technology. Let the guys who do that, let them do the best job at it.
Yeah.
But we have to have the muscle and the ability to make them part of our projects and build incentives for everyone to participate over and above. It's a nice thing to do, but we have to meet the needs of hundreds of stakeholders in a massive project.
100%.
So that's how we are building it out.
Exactly. That's the only way it's going to happen. Like, that's what we even mentioned when we talk about Gen Z, which is the theme of this podcast, Generation Climate. There's an ecosystem of multiple different types of stakeholders who are all partners in the same fight for climate change. And like I was mentioning earlier, the number one thing is that everyone needs to be incentivized to want to help make this happen.
Yeah, you're right. And I really strongly feel like it has to make sense for everyone in their worldview, in their language, in their vocabulary, and I think that's what it'll take to make a successful large-scale project developer.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
My privilege.
It was a really great one. Thank you. Thank you.